John Fox Slater is a man whose impact is felt not just throughout Norwich, but through the entire nation.
The legacy of John Slater doesn't just end with a museum and an auditorium named after him. It's actually translated into real lives, into real meaning. And that there are people, countless people we'll never know in this country who are benefiting today from the Slater Fund.
Before Rockefeller, before Carnegie, all of those millionaire industrialists with whom we are familiar for generous, large-scale giving, John Fox Slater had done that first. The 1880s were a really charged and volatile time in America. Northern interest for Reconstruction had ended. African Americans in the South were losing political rights they had gained, losing social status they had gained through Reconstruction, and really the only area where they saw continuous growth through this period was in the field of education.
Education in the South for blacks was frowned upon, and I'm being very polite when I use the term frowned on. Quite frankly, there was met with violence, and I think people have to understand the bravery of John Slater and others like him to brave those elements, to even think and dare think of having blacks educated.
So in 1882, a couple of years before John Fox Slater passes away, he incorporates the John Fox Slater Fund for the Education of Freedmen. And he contributed $1 million of his own money. And in today's dollars, that'd be worth anywhere from about 23 to as much as $25 million. And this money was specifically used to start this fund that was going to invest in educational advancement of the newly emancipated, enslaved populations of the southern states.
And in North Carolina, Winston-Salem was an example. That was a part of North Carolina where blacks were not educated past grammar school. Slater recognized this, and the Slater Fund funded what we then called in 1892 Slater Normal Institution. So the name Slater because they 100% funded that institution, not partial, 100%. And that's why Winston-Salem was originally called the Slater Industrial Normal School, 1892. Subsequently, in 1923, it did revert to what we now call the Winston-Salem State University. People forget that the students attending these schools were sons and daughters of former slaves. And I think it has to be put in perspective. Also put in perspective that blacks were not allowed to be educated still in the South at that time. So for every black student that braved those laws, to go to a Slater-funded school was acting in courage.
There's a question of motivation when it comes to why John Fox Slater did the things that he did. What we know is, yes, John Fox Slater was concerned with education, but being someone who was an industrialist, John Fox Slater directly benefited from the institution of slavery. And John Fox Slater is not ignorant of this reality. He's not. He is a very well-educated and very intelligent man. He understands that the northern economies are benefiting directly from the cotton being picked by enslaved labor in the South.
I think John Fox Slater shared the same guilt feelings of a lot of wealthy white industrialists, particularly in the North, that he clearly understood that he was who he was financially speaking because of the labor and toil, misery, and suffering of slaves in the South. Cotton for him was money. He was a very religious man. He was very close to his pastor, and I think that he was moved probably, I presume, by some of the sermons that he heard, where maybe you're part of the problem, not the solution. So I'll speak in today's vernacular. How can I be not the problem anymore? How can I be the solution guy? The easiest way was to uplift blacks from having to labor and pick cotton for survival and give them something that would allow them to move up the ladder financially, economically, socially, as a people. And what better way than through education?
I think the most important thing to know about Slater is the legacy of philanthropy and the idea that you should support your community. He obviously felt that his community was much larger than Norwich, although he was extremely generous here in the city of Norwich and throughout Connecticut. But he was someone who invested in the future of this country and understood that education was at its heart.
He was so concerned with education because he believed it was a vehicle to success. He believed that if someone had access to a quality education, then they would have the opportunity to become good, productive citizens of this country.
Every time we step on this campus, and particularly when we enter this building, we should remember the legacy that continues to give to allow those less fortunate and those who are victims of racism in this country to have benefited to get an education. That's a serious, serious statement. John Slater should be remembered. Every student should know this every day, that we are proud to be part of an institution that enabled a generation after generation after generation of blacks to take their rightful place in this society and in this country.